want you all to know that we'll let you know when we have a plan. You will have some way to get Convo credit remotely, probably. We also want you to know that we are absolutely going to work with you on any extenuating circumstances, whether that's internet connections, things like that. We'll work with you. We'll have a plan at some point, and we will let you know what's going on with Convo, but obviously today's is the last Convo for now. We don't know when Convo might resume in this format. So thank you for being here today with us. So anyway, we'll talk to you about it soon, and a couple of other announcements coming up as well.
So today, I'm here with FemCorps, and I want to talk about a woman that I find inspiring and significant. So Esperanza Spalding is a jazz bassist, singer, songwriter, and composer, and she's the winner of numerous accolades, including 4 Grammy Awards. She is a woman of Indigenous, African American, and Latina descent. And at the age of 5, she began playing professional violin with the Chamber Music Society of Oregon. She discovered the double bass in high school, and she went on to study at the Berklee College of Music. And upon graduating from there, she became the youngest ever instructor at that institution at the age of 20. In the following years, Spalding has released 7 studio albums, for which she's won a lot of notoriety, including one called Exposure, which she created from start to finish in 77 consecutive hours and live streamed. And she said that that process forced her to be more creative, and it allowed other people to witness her creative process. In 2017, she became a professor of the practice of music at Harvard University. And she's been described as the 21st century's jazz genius and recognized as a musical prodigy, but she's tried to distance herself from titles like these and focus on her work and her growth as an artist and musician. The quotation that I have up here comes from Precious, one of the tracks on her self-titled album. It says, "I'm not gonna sit around and waste my precious divine energy trying to explain and be ashamed of things you think are wrong with me." She's unapologetically confident in herself, her music, and her worth as a creator and an artist. She's a singular talent and an incredible inspiration, and I'm really glad to be able to celebrate her and the many other women who enrich our world this month and every month. Thanks.
Hey guys, so I'm here for a part of SAC. So as you guys know, since school's canceled, SAC events are canceled as well. As of right now, Powder Puff is going to be fully canceled. So if you signed up, please tell your friends that as of right now, that event is for sure going to be canceled because it's a large group of people. March 30th, I will come out with an email with future ideas or possibilities of events that if we do come back, things will change because we're not going to try to do large events, like as large as events as we planned. So just watch out for an email if we come back. And if not, then I'll just say that all events are canceled for the year. So thank you.
Hey guys, Ron with Diversity Council. Like Lil said, Diversity Council is also canceling their events for the rest of the month, so no self-defense class, no movie. We will keep you guys updated with events as they go forward if we do come back to school. Thanks.
Hi, my name's Ellie Bradley. I'm in the musical Theory of Relativity that we opened last night because of... Thanks. Because of all the things happening, tonight is going to be our closing night of the musical. I'm going to be yelling about cake. We all get pretty excited about fruit, and it's just a show about community and nice things. Please come see it. We put a lot of work into it. Thanks.
Hey guys, so some sad news regarding YOP. Obviously, because of all the coronavirus stuff, YOP is going to be canceled.
Just kidding! Stay to your stuff!
Today's the deadline at midnight. Yeah, 11:59. And also all those neat poetry buckets that are around campus. Put stuff in them because they're going away tomorrow morning.
You don't have to touch people to write poetry.
Yeah, you can do it alone.
Thank you. Thank you to all of our announcements. I will welcome our speaker this morning, Randy Regier. He's an artist based in Kansas City. I'm excited to hear from him. I think it'll be a nice change of pace, and I will allow him to introduce himself and his work on his own. But give a round of applause for Randy.
And you absolutely can touch people to read poetry, but do it with the words. That's the way to do it with poetry. Living in Kansas City currently, I'll keep my autobiography a little brief because I'm old enough that's hard to do. I've lived in Wichita and Abilene with my wife and kids around, been in Kansas off and on a lot, grew up in Oregon, lived in Maine. And then now we're in Kansas City, and I'm an artist, which is probably why I'm here. And I'm just going to go right into the presentation just for the sake of time and so we can get right to the work. And if there are other questions about why I do what I do or the backdrop to that, it'll either be in the presentation or just ask me. And if at any point during this talk you have a question that really needs to be asked in the moment, like it's right on the thing that we're looking at, get my attention and ask me. You really can't cause me offense, I promise. So it's all good. I am a cartoonist. This is not my cartoon, but I really like it, and I thought a little cartooning wouldn't hurt given these trying times. So I think this is genius. Moving on, I'm going to go into my work. So we moved from Newton, Kansas to Oregon in 1971. And one of the first things my parents took me to see was the wreck of the Peter Iredale on the Oregon coast up by Astoria, Oregon. And this was like the shipwreck was about 1901 era, early 20th century. It was just a freighter. It wasn't anything spectacular as ships go. But as a child, when we would go to see this like once a year or so, on the rare occasion we actually made a road trip away from the farm, this ship represented to me everything that the hopes and dreams and flights of imagination could give to a boy who lives on a farm with books and dirt, which were the two things I had a lot of as a kid. And beautiful place, but I mean, I just really have always been, since a very young child, was fascinated with machinery, with ships and planes and cars and spaceships and stories. And so this photograph is just a few years ago, went back to Oregon for a couple of years to take another job briefly. And when my wife Vicki and I got out to the Peter Iredale, the fact that this much was still there was an incredibly powerful experience for me, because I remembered, I don't quite trust the child's imagination anymore, memory, not the imagination. I totally trust the child's imagination, but the memory, I thought, well, I probably remember that as a much grander experience than it could be. And I went back, and it was as real and as grand and as powerful. And the fact that it still exists, even as this wreck, was a really potent moment for me, and really reconfirmed that there can be a time in our childhood when we fall in love with a dream or a vision or a place or a thing, and that's a real love. And sometimes, if you're really fortunate, when you're older, you can go back and that place still exists. It certainly influenced an ongoing life fascination with artifacts and relics. These images that I just drug off the web, these sunken ships and sunken planes and cars that have come out of very dire circumstances. I'd spent years in the auto body industry, so I have a role there, but those polished, precise vehicles in the upper right hold little or no interest for me. There's really no narrative there for me. They're too precise, they're too polished, they're fetish objects, that's great. The other ones have a great deal of fascination for me. Those have stories, those have real lived lives. Books, huge part of my life, still always have been. We didn't have a television. It wasn't a religious conviction of my dad's. He just felt there was nothing on television that was as good as in books. And I, for the most part, would agree with him, not entirely, but that said, books were, all of my access to narrative was through books as a kid or through radio, listening to stories read on radio. We used to do that. NPR used to read books. Two different men would read in the afternoon. And so the thing about books that is particularly powerful to me as it created the artist I would become was that these books, when you read them or you take them in, you have to generate that visual in your imagination, and it can be developed this really rich visual. and it's yours to create, unless the book is unless the book is completely illustrated, which these aren't, just the covers. It's left to you to create. I also think of the Earth as a book, and partly because of this stunning cover for this Alfred Noyes book, but also if you think of the Earth, particularly from a sense of archaeology and discovery and travel, the Earth really is a book that contains the history of humankind and history of time before humans, if you choose to see it that way. And you don't have to go any further than Kansas to see that when you see the incredible fossils that come out of our old seabed and what have you. Old stories in the world, and they're available to us just for going for a walk. And then stories that maybe haven't happened yet are of a deep and abiding fascination to me, or stories that could have happened, and maybe they happened and we weren't aware of them yet because we haven't encountered the remains of those stories yet, which leads me the direction I'm taking this talk to a specific work. This book, The Fallen Spaceman on the left, was a young adult version of the short story on the right by Lee Harding. And in a nutshell, the story, it takes place in an indeterminate, it's a science fiction story written in 1971. It takes place in an indeterminate time, you don't know, but you know in space, and this protagonist is doing some service work on an interstellar spacecraft. The spacecraft takes off while he's still working on it. Sort of like if you've ever had someone putting gas in your car and you drive off while they're still standing there. That's basically what happens to this guy, except that the car was his. And he falls through space. The suit preserves his life, and the suit has enough intelligence, this would be before we called things smart, to land him on a planet. And as the reader, you sort of intuit that this is probably Earth, this planet that this person lands on. The suit saves his life, crashes into the woods, and then these people on this planet find him. Takes them a couple days to get the suit open because they've never seen anything like it. They try to save his life, but they can't, because it turns out he's human, but he's so many generations removed from Earth, he can no longer live on Earth. And the suit is just left. In the story, the suit's abandoned. We'll come back to that. If you ever, those of you who ever have a chance to go to the Wichita Art Museum, I would urge you, if you can, if it's still hanging in the permanent collection, those collections rotate, but there's a piece by Ben Shawn called The Blind Botanist, and it's a man falling in love with a cactus. It's a stunning piece of work. And Ben Shawn was one heck of a writer. And this idea, this is one of the things that drives the reason I make objects out of stories is best put by Ben Shawn here. The human wish to formulate ideas, to recreate them into entities so that meanings will not depart fitfully as they do from the mind, so that thinking and belief and attitudes may endure as actual things. And I think that's a really good argument for the arts, for making things. Thinking, belief, and attitudes may endure. And whether people agree with those things or not, that's left to the tribe. But putting those things into a place where they can endure is important to human culture. So you saw the sort of outer space images of these people in spacesuits falling. And this one on the left is a early NASA hard suit. It was made about 1960 before they realized, we as a space program realized the suits could be flexible. Early space suits were thought to have to be armor plated because we knew little about space and what the dangers were. So that's an actual space suit. I think might be some variations on this at the Cosmosphere in Hutch, if you want to check that out. And of course, the one on the right recognizes medieval, but you can see the relationship is intimate and really, and I think they're just beautiful objects as sculpture. They stand alone as sculptures, and for their own reasons. And so as I approach this body of work that I'm going to be showing to you, I was thinking a lot about the aesthetic of a suit that would protect a person, and how that suit gives a person an identity. If we see this suit on the right, most of us say, oh, that's a knight, as if all of a sudden we've identified the person that wears that suit. May not be the case who's wearing it tonight, but that's what the suit tells us, or an astronaut, or superheroes. And I'm sorry that one of the superheroes can't be here with us today, but one of them is. And so these are, powerful examples of outfits that give us great powers and identities. And the history of space flight is open to a lot of interpretation, and This is the cathedral at Salamanca on the left, a very old Spanish cathedral. And you'll see this image show up a lot, and people suggest that this is proof that space travel existed long before our awareness of it, when in fact that was done in the 1980s or 90s. A Spanish artisan was asked to incorporate a modern motif into an old cathedral, so the spaceman was included then. The two on the right, we really don't know. Those are actually quite antiquated objects and a painting, and not a lot is known about the authorship of those. But it's intriguing stuff, and there's a lot of theory and non-theory that revolves around notions of antique space or space travel before this current time. More to known history, this is Leonov, and Alexei Leonov. He was the first human to walk in space, float in space outside of a craft in 1965, a Russian cosmonaut, and not even knowing if he would get back in the craft. It was just an incredible thing. He exited this capsule and floated in space. And I found this after the fact, when I did some more research on him. He actually, while he was in this capsule looking at the Earth, he did the first artwork in space with colored pencils. There's even a rubber band to keep the pencils from floating off of his wrist. And the pencils are tied with string together so he wouldn't lose them. And so this is the first, if not the only, artwork done in space looking at the Earth. And I think that's just, I've seen a lot of art museums. I have done some traveling, but I haven't seen many things that have more gravity for me than this. I think it's an incredibly powerful artifact, and it's just beautiful. Going back a little bit, I use a lot of found objects in my work, and that started when I was really young. So my dad instructed me. I think this might have been his work, but there's probably like 3 people in here that remember what flash bulbs were for, but that's how cameras used to get their light. And so I still use found objects. I'm taller and have a little bit less hair. But so this was my studio in Wichita when I built the piece that I'm going to be showing you. So we're now to the core of the work that I'm going to speak to. And so this idea of the fallen spaceman, the question I asked myself was, as I approached this work, I said, so in that story, the suit is left in the woods. They try to save the person passes away. But in the story, they never address this, never speak to the suit again. And the eternal child in me says, well, where's the spacesuit? Why didn't anybody care enough to go back and get the spacesuit? And I thought, well, then that's my challenge as an artist, to go and find the spacesuit, actually find the spacesuit from a short story from 1971 that's probably a fiction. But I thought, well, I'm going to try to suggest that story was in fact not a fiction and that it happened near here. So that said, you saw this, the NASA hard suit, the suit of armor, and then I got into my studio and I started to try to create a mechanical spacesuit that would be, at least plausibly, look as if it would spare a human life. And this place is probably still extant, but the gentleman who owned it has passed away, Cleo Wessling in Salina. And yeah, it looks like a super fun, toxic site, and I'm sure it is, but it's also one of the greatest art supply places in the known world for people like me. And a lot of the stuff I got for this suit I bought from Cleo before he passed away. So there's sort of if some of you go to Blick or buy your art supplies online or at shop, this is where I get most of mine, or did. This is the yard in Wichita. Any of you have Wichita peeps out here? It's an aircraft salvage hardware supply place, and I may have added a little bit of something from Michelangelo to it, but this is pretty much how I feel about the yard. It's like, man, I rely on the yard as much as I rely on running water in my life, maybe more. Just a found book, but I just love this person's name, Celestial Mechanics by W.M. Smart. Of course. A friend of mine said it'd only be better if his first initial was I, but that might be. I don't read this, I just think it's beautiful. What did you write? Celestial Mechanics. My last name is Smart. Perhaps you've read it. No. Newton, Kansas, and with a little borrowing here from the Martyr's Mirror, but this will be relevant in a second. That's the Mennonite Weekly World Review, and I got a call from them, from Tim Huber, And they had this old Kelvinator refrigerator died after many, many years of service. And they thought, well, it could go to recycling or to a landfill, or it could go to Randy. And they made the right call. And so I drove up to Newton from Wichita, and I took it home, and I started cutting on it. And I thought, there's my spacesuit. I mean, it's the first thing everybody thinks, right? It's an old refrigerator. Must be a spacesuit. You just have to remove, just what's the old saying? Just have to remove the parts that aren't spacesuit. And so started cutting away, and we're getting going here, right? I'm going to keep this thing moving along so that there's time for questions or whatever. But I mean, I could elaborate on any one of these, but I think most of them, they tend to speak for themselves. Again, if you can get my attention and you have a question, do it. The helmet was a score, total score. Little nice antique shop in Heston. And I went in there, and I could not find a helmet. And I needed, the helmet is really difficult because it's really got to be plausible. And just a plastic bubble is just so stereotypical that it's like it's been done to death, the plastic bubble helmet. I'm like, man, I got to find a helmet. And that's an old jukebox. Those used to sit in your little diners at the table, and you'd put your dime in and punch the numbers, and it would play whatever, hit that you were allowed, that was fed to you. But it's just such a, it's practically a ready-made. I should notate at this point, important, even though all the constrictions and restrictions on building this piece are self-imposed, like I'm the one that's making up all my own rules as I go, I did require that every component of this suit that I built, I was able to wear it, so that when people encounter it ultimately in its site, it would be plausible. And one thing that humans tend to know about it is humans tend to know what humans look like. And if you try to fake it, you will get called out. And so I really was rigorous about wearing I didn't wear the suit in its entirety, but I wore every component of it as I built it. About this point, I thought I had a chance to pull this thing off, because I don't know that I exude confidence or not in my practice, but I don't have that much confidence in the process, during the process. I don't know that I can do these things. I try to break it down into components and get the components credible and then move to the next component. But there are times where I meet a stage of it where I just don't even know how this is done or how I can do this, because there are skill sets I definitely don't have. And when that happens, I try to go out into the world and find found objects that save my gravy. Research, a lot of research. These suits, these are Russian suits. No, it's not. That's NASA on the left, sorry. Russian on the, no, might be the same suit. I don't know anymore. It's the same suit, yeah, it is. So this is a more advanced version of that old silver aluminum titanium hard suit I showed you. But seriously, to make a hard suit this flexible takes an incredible amount of engineering and sophistication. I have none of that. Not to mention I had, no budget. So I have to mimic this, but these photographs were immensely helpful, besides the fact that they're just delightful. So the hips and the torso, the thighs and the hips were really difficult. That's a really difficult. His guy's butt is tough. And so Wichita again, a lot of aircraft detritus. So I got some nose cones from a scrapyard, which seemed to make a pretty good form. And then the thighs, the upper thighs are these, you still see them around, thankfully for me. In fact, most of your Midwest antique stores and malls have them. They're they're made by Chromex with a K. Oh, I'll get to that. I'm getting there. That'll come up in a second, sorry. So here's the suit at this point I'm starting to feel like I've got a chance of pulling this thing off. I've worn the legs and the torso and the helmet fits, but I'm actually putting off the hardest part till last. How many of you have had figure drawing, have done figure drawing? Hands are so hard to do unless you're one of those people that's not hard, and good for you. But they're so hard to draw and even harder to make, because hands are just so articulate and important, and there's a reason a lot of old paintings, particularly those by the itinerant painters in the 19th century in New England, wouldn't paint hands. They'd have them in a pocket or in a coat, so they didn't have to. That's the great way around it, and I didn't have that luxury. We'll get to that. Oh, so Chromex, there's an old ad for Deluxe Pantry Partners by Chromex. So that's what the legs and the arms end up being. I just drove all over Kansas. I could have got a lot of the stuff on eBay, but I had this self-imposed mandate that it wasn't wise, but it was mine, and that was I would find the objects in Kansas. I would find everything in Kansas to build the thing that would be in Kansas. I didn't mention it. I should now backtrack a little bit. I started this piece out of my own volition as I just wanted it to be in the world so that thinking and belief and meaning would exist as a thing. And about 30% of the way into this project, the Ulrich Museum of Art, I was approached by the curator and the director asking if they wanted to purchase a piece for the permanent collection at the Ulrich Museum. And I suggested that this piece might be the appropriate piece. So at this point in the process, it's now committed to an art museum as a permanent piece. So one of the things that happens with that is as an artist, you're just thrilled because now you're going to have some income again for a bit, which is, I don't know how many of you use income, but it's nice to have it every now and then. Maybe, right? Okay. Income. And so that was really great, but then all of a sudden the piece is really like, I'm really on the hook to land this thing because when it's just my construction for my own means and desires, I could walk away or fail at it. And now I can't do either. So there's this new restriction, like Randy, now it has to really work, not just be, but it has to work. So thanks to Chromex, a lot of that was done for me back in the 50s. And here's where I really got bailed out on the hands. So it turns out, looking at vintage illustrations, that one of the early anticipations was that you wouldn't use your hands in space. You would have tentacle gloves, and your hands would be inside the glove. Well, that's much more doable for a person like me than an articulated five-fingered hand, all made out of something, I don't know what. So this was a huge bailout. Feet are not so hard. Shoes aren't that hard, particularly if you have some lampshades. And so she's starting to come together, and I did say she, and we'll get to that. Did I see a hand? We're all good? Okay. And orange and silver is important, largely because that's orange and silver shows up a lot in vintage science fiction illustration for some reason. Yellow and black and orange and silver, probably because they make really punchy colors in deep space environments, but also because my dad painted his motorcycle helmet orange and silver when I was 5 years old, and I thought it had to be the coolest helmet ever because Dad painted it orange and silver, and that's obviously he's cooler than every other man on earth at the time, so there you go. So there's the palette. So she's coming together here pretty well. The arms, more light fixtures, things. Started to put some patina on it because spacesuits, a viable looking spacesuit would not be very polished and clean. It, in my opinion, a vintage viable spacesuit, were a person to find one, would be pretty rancid. It would have gone through some very difficult circumstances, and I can only imagine that I've never been in a spacecraft just as someone has been in it for 6 months or a year, but I'm guessing it's a little gamey. So gamey is good. Here's some detail images of this suit now. I think the back of the helmet was a 8mm film projector that I cut up just for fun. I don't know that I have a picture of the hands. Maybe I don't. Maybe I will. So the suit's built at this point, and then since in the story the suit is found buried, or it's found in the story the suit is left in the woods. Then for this work to be viable for me, it has to be buried for a couple years. And the museum understood that. They said, it's got to be buried at least a year before you can have it. And they're like, fine, we'll pay you the other half when it comes up. So, but money in the future is still real money, right? And so some of you might know Mike Miller out in Towanda, Kansas. He taught a semester here, I think. I know he did. And so Mike is an incredibly gracious person with a bunch of property out in Towanda, so we took the suit out there. You can sort of see her hands here. the tentacle gloves. But if you want to see them up close, I'll get to that. But it's this. I like the way the pieces happen now, but it's not what I want from it. It looks a little bit like those cars on the top right in that second or third photo. It looks kind of precious and artsy. And so buried her. While she was buried, it's about a year and a half or something that was underground, I did more research and I got to thinking about these cicadas that we see all over on these trees and how those are exoskeletons. They're not so much protective as they are something that's shed so that the creature inside can emerge. And I got to thinking that was a nice analogy to this suit, that it's an exoskeleton and somebody or something was in this suit at one time. The suit on the left is a 19th century French deep sea diving suit. And I don't know who the first person was to trust that thing and go down in it, but I'm proud of them. But that's amazing. Utsi, the Tyrolean Alps, some of you may know of this man who was found about 3,100 before the Common Era. And turns out he was murdered. They found a spear arrow tip in his back. He had tattoos. They found that they had the remains of what he'd eaten his last meal. And it was found because the ice cap was melting, and two German hikers found this body. They thought it was a recent case, so they called in the cops and like, no, it's like 3,100 years old, so it's not recent. So cold case if there ever was one. And sorry, I didn't even mean that, but that worked. Yeah. I'll take it. That's Gary Staub on the left. He's in Missouri, and he's one of the world's, if not the world's premier paleo artist. He recreates these incredibly tactile and believable sculptures and models of dinosaurs and prehistoric creatures. Am I doing okay on time? Yeah, okay, good. And so he went to Italy, and they 3D scanned Utsi, the original, and then he was tasked with making an exact model that museums could show wouldn't be the remains of the actual person. Gary Staub turned me on to Lauren Isley. This book, The Immense Journey, if you really want to, if you get like going to lockdown for a couple weeks, get this book and read it, and you won't be in lockdown. You will take a trip through time that will, read this book if you get shut in, if you can, get a copy. The Immense Journey by Lauren Isley, a lot of it takes place in the Midwest. Lauren Isley spent time in Kansas and in Nebraska, from Nebraska originally. Astounding book about the history and the earth right beneath our feet. And so that's all relatable to Utsi and this whole, I'm taking a bit of a elliptical loop around my work and to come back to it. One question that may occur to some people, and it has before, and I'll just get it out in the front, is that I get asked quite a bit in my work, why the past? What's the fascination with the past? Why do my things have to look old? Why do they have to be vintage? Why do they have to look like they're from the past? Why can't I make a thing that looks like it's made here and now? And I don't really have the answer to that. I don't want to over-examine why I make the things I do because I could lose the impetus to make them. Self-examination is good up to a point, and there's a point where it verges on loathing. And so this, there's two terms that get used, bantered about a lot contemporary times, and it's nostalgia is the one word. Nostalgia can mean homesickness. It literally means sickness for home. And it can be a sickness. And it's particularly if it's a class or culture of people who think the past was better, like they want it to be like it was then, and be damned what it was like for other people. But my past was better. I want that back. That is a problem, and we're living that daily in our political spectrum and in our cultural spectrum. There's another type of nostalgia, and that is restorative nostalgia, which is the emphasis is to value what is important of the past, to steward what is important of the past, to hang on to those things, to keep things that were valuable and right and just and beautiful and bring them forward. Don't just bury them because they're of the past. Because something is inherently of the past does not make it a bad thing or a thing worthy of rejection. Some things are very much worth keeping and stewarding and growing. And that is argued as restorative nostalgia. That I'm okay with. And also, this might have been, Tim, this might have been you and I think. But this person that Richard Rohr, that some friends and I read and follow, he talks about this, the value of the past antiquity is that because we equate it with the eternal, and it's really hard to equate the present with the eternal. And like right now, we don't want to equate the present with the eternal because it feels eternal. So it's a real problem today. But the past, for me, feels more eternal, and that gives a sense of gravity and purpose to it. Couple images of people's ships blowing up, and just kind of compelling imagery. This is stuff that works for me when I'm working out my aesthetic. This is a bad photograph of at a wall at the Cosmosphere. That's a Russian Vostok spacecraft, which there's one at the Cosmosphere that's been to space. And so the Russians landed this big ball with a person in it, and we used the ocean to land, the Americans. This is Oregon State University a few years ago. They found mammoth bones under the stadium. So just, go to all these Oregon State football games, and right underneath the stadium is mammoth bones. Who knew? And then when they went to renovate the stadium, boom. So I wouldn't be surprised if here at Bethel there's probably T-Rex or maybe a cow. An old cow, very old cow, early cow. Kansas again, links of, I'm going to accelerate a little bit again, links of medieval Spanish chainmail have been found in Kansas. And it was around my notes aren't on this, so I'm having to go from memory, which is not working that well these days. But at any rate, Coronado's expedition, 1881 and 1889, these were found in McPherson County. And it turns out that they're most likely, since they were Spanish chainmail, the only explanation was that they were part of Coronado's expedition in around 1541 to 1543. So in Kansas, rural Kansas, you have Spanish chainmail. There's not a story there, and albeit a very troubling story, if you unpack that narrative, it doesn't end in a very happy place. It's still unpacking. But that said, the way these histories intertwine, the things that can be found in our very midst are really, really compelling. So now we're back to the piece, and the Ulrich Museum contacts me. It's about time to bring the celestial mechanic, as I call her, up. And they say, well, what do you envision as an installation at the museum? And I thought, well, I want basically a shallow, I wouldn't call it a grave so much, but as if the suit were found buried on the Wichita State campus. I said, the backstory might be that you guys go to put a flagpole in, you strike metal, you call on the archaeologist, and they're like, no, you can't take this out. This is buried here. And so you put a plastic dome over it, and it has to stay. That was sort of the story I was working with. So there's a little sketch I did for them to give them a sense of what I wanted. And then I made a model, so it'd be more tactile, and I mailed the model off to them and said, here's kind of what I'm thinking. I think this would be a good experience. I'd like to be a 6-year-old and stumble upon this thing. I mean, it's really, let's be honest, it's still about me at this point. And because I'm making this all up. And so I got professional help from the museum staff. And these are professionals. Don't try this on your own. So Bob and Sally Frater was the then curator, and Bob Workman was the director. And they started walking around campus and taking photos. And we were in Oregon at this point, saying, this site, this site, this site. And I'm like, yeah, looks great. Let's just find a place and let's do the thing. Interject a little bit of George Kubler, if this general idea of playing with time and stuff, it fascinates anyone here. This is a book you ought to look up, The Shape of Time by George Kubler. And he writes, the cultural clock runs mainly upon ruined fragments of matter recovered from refuse heaps and graveyards, from abandoned cities and buried villages. That's how the most information we get about our ancestors is from the things they left behind. And if they put ideas in those things, we have some access to who they were and what they wanted from their lives. So here she is coming up in Towanda after about a year down, before and after. I'm pretty happy with the piece now in terms of it's starting to do the thing I want from it. And we're going to come to and then this illustration I found, I started looking at science fiction illustrators that dabble in this, and this is Derek Stenning. And he got his image. He found this image in a 1960 book of geology, and then he now Derek Stenning does this kind of work. It's really powerful contemporary imagery of people lost or suspended in space and difficult circumstances. You can see the relationship. I'm trying to think of I'm still unpacking the origin story for my suit. Then I took a photograph of my piece and kind of photoshopped it poorly, into the original Fallen Spaceman book to see if she worked. I'm like, yeah, that's working. And then there's this is an Ed Emschweiler illustration on the left of these kind of T-Rex space creatures unpacking this planet. And you can see about the fourth strata up, there's a human skeleton, and then there's like knives and bombs and guns up the strata, like automatic rifles in the top level. Like, yep, that's not too far distant future. And then the one on the right are these on another planet uncovering a human skeleton. This stuff has all been done in an illustration form, but to my knowledge, it hasn't been done in a material form. Simon Stollenhag, one of my favorite contemporary artists. This is called Of Passerines and Primates. Passerines are birds that have 3 toes pointing forward and 1 pointing back, so it's birds and primates. And so this, I think, is a really powerful illustration. And here we have a problem. So I didn't tell you until now. As you can see, there's a skull in my suit. And this is yeah, I got enough time. I'll touch on this. I have to now. So when I built this piece, I wanted to take it to the furthest extent of its ability to strike people as I could. And though in the story the suit was left empty, I thought, well, a suit with human remains in it would really shake up a passerby and ask the hardest possible questions. And I'm in my own world, literally, figuratively in my own world, thinking this through, and I'm justifying. I think, yeah, but it can't be a white guy, because all these old space stories are all white guys, and that's been done to death. Got to move out of white guy mode. So I met with a colleague in Wichita, and she's Korean-born, and we talked, and I said, what can I do? You know, and she goes, well, just get a Asian female skull. We agreed. It's like, make it an Asian female person. And I thought, great, her blessing, yeah. And she's like, yeah, go for it, do that, change it up. So I got on a museum supply place. It's a model. It's not a real skull, but it's indiscernible from a real skull. It's an incredible quality model. Weathered it, built it into the suit, and I thought, oh, okay, this is great. It's now not just a white guy in a suit made by a white guy artist. And it got to this point, and then Sally Frater, who you saw images earlier, at the Ulrich Museum, she called me, and she sounded really nervous. And I'm like, and Sally and I were really collegial, and she goes, I need to talk to you about your piece before it goes onto the campus. So, okay, she goes, there's a real issue with what you've done. And I go, what? She goes, it's the fact that even though it's not said that that's an Asian female skull replica, she goes, I know that. And she goes, the history of white Europeans showing the remains of other cultures has got to stop. And I went, oh, shit. Right. And she says, I'm so nervous to tell you this because she goes, one thing you're never supposed to do as a curator is tell an artist what they can or cannot do. She goes, but I have to tell you that if you keep the piece as is, she goes, I will have to go on record as speaking why this piece has a tremendous and inherent problem. And she said, furthermore, she goes, I know your heart. I know you don't mean to offend. She goes, I know you want to be inclusive. She goes, but it's not your story. You're reaching across to someone else's story and trying to include it in yours to make it okay. And it hurt to hear that because I had thought I had all my I's dotted, my T's crossed, and was trying to be inclusive and open and change and shift a canon that I thought needed to be shifted. And it took real courage for Sally to tell me this because the piece had already been bought, paid for. It was going into the museum grounds. And ultimately where the conversation landed, she said, it's up to you what to do. She goes, but it's probably a matter of you choosing which side of history you're going to land on as an artist when this piece is written about over time. And the reason I bring this up because I could have skipped over this skull because I took it out. But two things happened here, and I did take the piece out. So now the piece is at the Ulrich Museum. Here's what it looks like now. I got a couple more images and we'll wrap up. But here's what I want to say about Sally. One, it took tremendous courage for her to tell me that. She was in a really difficult situation already at the museum, not because of people at the museum, but culturally and professionally. She was on her way out. For her to contact me And tell me that took an immense act of courage, but also took that she cared enough for me to let me know that I could be in deep trouble, even though my intentions were completely other. And so I want to say, and this is still a matter of contention around some of my colleagues, that I gave in. I didn't give in. I tried to do the right thing. Another benefit from her calling me out was, one, it was a real teachable moment for me. And now when I see a mummy at the Nelson Atkins or something, I think, you shouldn't be here. You should be where you were put originally. Not okay. And I have completely rethink how I look at anyone's cultural remains. It's opened up my heart to that. And also, to be completely, another reason that Sally bailed me out is if this piece is supposed to adhere to the narrative, there was no body in the suit. It was just the suit. The original intention was just to find the suit. So in a sense, without intentionality, she took me back. Her advice and her concern took me back to the original intent of the piece, which is what happened to the suit. So I'm just incredibly grateful to Sally, and I just want to say that. I don't know where Sally is now. We can't reach her. But I will always be grateful to her for waking me up. Shouldn't have been her responsibility, but she did it. So you get a chance to wake one of us old white dudes up, wake us up. Do it. Keep doing it. We're fast asleep. Here it is at the museum. This is spring. Think. Thank you.
Thank you, Randy. We have 3 minutes. 1 or 2 quick questions.
Hi, thanks so much for speaking. This was great. I love it when artists come in for Convo. This is kind of a small question, but how much did the suit weigh? And how did you get it around? It looks not light.
No, I don't know what it weighs. I'm guessing it probably weighs in the vicinity of 75 pounds. But, you know, if I'm just going to answer that in terms of like what would the purpose of the suit been, had it been an actual suit, it wouldn't have been for space, you know, everything in our space, our atmospheric to space, weight is the ultimate consideration. But as this suit may or may not have been from Earth originally, maybe that was less of a consideration. I don't know. But frankly, it's mostly aluminum, so it has a certain sense of viability to it. But it's not articulated either. It's a static thing. Technically, it could be worn, but it's like a straitjacket could be worn. You wouldn't get far with it. Yeah. Yeah, but I'd say 75 pounds. The helmet's stupid heavy. Yeah. It's at the Wichita State Campus, north of Alberg Hall. Alberg Hall, north lawn of Alberg Hall, if you want to see it. Should be there for a long time, hopefully.
Give another round of applause for Randy Regier. I suppose we